Good day, everyone. We are the second reporter from the course Philippine Popular Culture. Today's video, we are going to define about culturalism. We bear into the definition of culturalism according to four experts. First, Richard Hogarth from his book The Uses of Literacy, an analysis essay from George Hoare. Second, Raymond Williams, The Analysis of Culture. Third, Eduardo Palmer Thompson, The Making of English Working Class. And lastly, Stuart Hall and Paddy Wannells, The Popular Arts, a review by Ludovic Hunter Tilney, which will be later discussed by my groupmates too. As the first reporter of this lesson, I am tasked to discuss Richard Hogarth's The Uses of Literacy, an essay of George Hoare. The Book of Hogarth is the study of class living through a period of cultural change. There are three main reasons why we have to read this book. The first one is it is deeply humane an account of social group, mainly in northern class and experiencing in two different cultures. First is the tradition of working class, and the second one is the powerful commercialism of the post-war consumer capitalism. Second is the broadly cited as one of the foundation texts of cultural studies from Raymond Williams and E.P. Thompson. And the last one is the receptions of the uses of literature in the British New Left during 1950s. Part of the value of studying this historic document is an entire order of a group of life, thus understanding inequalities of life and the way things work. It highlighted that the culture used in any kind of literary studies by providing an account of a way of life that is not merely marginalized. When we say marginalized, it is equal to the working class. Furthermore, he added that the culture here is in a way that is easily accepted today, experiences and habits of everyday group of life. And all of these aspects of a way of life must be given their place for us to understand the meaning of culture. During the British New Left, Raymond Williams reviewed the book. And he responded that the commercial society and the idea of the culture replacing or subordinating existing working class ways of life seemed to be valuable. Hogarth then corrected that in his second part of the uses of literature, he said that the shallowness and species of populism of popular publication, as well as their banality and meretriciousness of the industry that produces them, which he clarifies fairly and straightforwardly to the resilient working class culture that he previously outlined. This thought was quickly processed as a cultural shift that Hogarth described. William, however, is correct that emphasizing the exposure of commercial culture is not the consumption of which we must attend, that the culture has influenced all classes. This is the born of paperbacks, advertising, television, and mass market. During the early British New Left, in late 1950s and in late 1960s, has redefined the meaning of socialism to a system of thought including the importance of the literature, the schooling, the cinema, the human relationship, experiment, and all in all the scale of human activities. Hogarth's sense of textures, of lived experience, and the real social vision that exists in actual communities. In early British New Left, culture is taking seriously about the people. There are reforms about social reforms, such as they are eager about their rights, political rights, their movement, gender roles, and all of these drastically reform social habit, and thus Hogarth says about questions such as how are class, politics, and potential of radical change expressed in popular culture, and how do we avoid taking the facile intellectual shortcut of thinking about the masses and the common man. Well, these questions about the social reform bases on solidarity and mutuality that exists in society with culture in television and in newspaper, which seem to emphasize wholly different aspect and value of life. In short, we contrast a radical politics that takes into account of complexities and contradiction in contemporary culture. It is contradiction of the contemporary culture because there is a social reform, and Hogarth says since it is a lived experience, whatever social reform it is part of the culture, because culture, he says, is a lived experience. So whatever social reform it is accepted to his definition as a culture. Before Hogarth was able to conclude his definition about culturalism, it is a lengthy discussion. However, he pointed out immediately that his definition toward culture is how a classes or a social group give meaning or give value to it. They were able to give historical condition and their relationship, in which they are able to handle the condition and that existence as it is lived in their tradition and practices. He also pointed out that culture should be understood as the matter of meaning, or as Hogarth puts it, the practices of making sense. And that is all for my report about Richard Hogarth's The Uses of Literacy from George Hoare Analysis Essay. Now, the continuation of the second expert. This is about Raymond Williams. Let us jump about his idea, his analysis about culture. Williams' idea about culture is much easier than the other expert, because he was very straightforward about his definition towards the culture, and he most of his critics he abolished or he disliked. Like for example, in the common culture in Lybicism, he disregard about the common culture. He also criticized some of the works, such as in Thompson. He criticized one of those. His analysis is mainly straightforward. Raymond Williams' analysis in the culture focuses on understanding about cultural theory, cultural history, TV, press, radio, and advertising. According to William, culture analysis is the method of understanding what a culture is, expressing by analyzing its cultural expression, and therefore reconstructing and interpreting particular way of life. We have to highlight the word particular way of life. Particular way of life is equivalent to our culture of how we live our life. That is our culture. It is conceptualized about our emotion, our deeds, our classes, what else? The tradition that we have as a nation, or like a small group of people, that is conceptualized as a particular way of our life. It is there are three parts of it. Number one is the ideal, which means that culture can be state of human perfection, meaning there are certain universal values that we create for the timeless order. So when we say ideal and the universal values, it is like all of us has it. We have to agree. It is an idea. We have to agree about this. For example, as Philippines, we have an ideal about our culture, right? We have even these universal values. One of this is pagmamano po, because we ideal its ideology as a respect. We have this hospitality, because when we say we are hospitable to other person, then they are giving back and then we expect them to give back their hospitality. So that is a universal value of our existing life. Another one is, the second one is documentary, which means that the surviving text of practices of a certain culture. So it is a surviving text of a particular culture. The focus is on human experience of intellectual and imaginative works that make up a culture. So when we say about imaginative work, we have a lot of it, such as Jose Rizal. There are a lot of works, imaginative works that he does, and that portrays some of our culture too. Last one is social clarification of values. This means that a culture is a description of a particular way of life. It also says that this last category is some of the contemporary analysis. So when we say about contemporary analysis, contemporary means today. It takes about 3 points to explain how each one is different. There are 3 ways of thinking about a culture. Social definition. Number 1 is culture as a particular life. This means that it is how we live our life. How we live our life would sum up our culture. Number 2 is culture as an expression of particular way of life. So this would basically means that our thoughts and our feelings, this would sum up our culture of how we live our life. Number 3 is culture analysis as a method of reconstituting a particular way of life. This means that we discover nature or build up again our nature, our culture. This means that we have to restore our culture. William described society's constant change as cultural feelings. This means that our culture is not stable. There is always a metamorphosis. There is always changes about our culture. This would means that there is an emergence of culture. Our behavior it is changing. Our behavior it is always unconstant and continue to change. Therefore it does conclude that past generation has their own structure of feelings, and the new generation has also their own structure of feelings. So basically in the gap between generations, there's always a different structure of feelings. That is why it is a constant change. There are 3 levels of culture. Number 1 is lived culture, which by definition says experienced by people in their day-to-day life in a specific place and at a particular time. This means that our culture, it is man-made, and it is only accessible to those people living in that time and in that place. Second one is a period culture. In definition, it is a recorded culture which includes the product and daily facts from a culture. William pointed this second level of culture as a culture of period. The third and last level of culture is culture of selective tradition, which by definition says the factor connecting lived culture and period cultures. This means that this is the legacy that would explain about the past culture, and which would support or justify the actions of the present culture or the present time. For example is the third generation Lola would say to us that nobody would read this novel anymore. But when we read that novel, they would say that this version is twisted. But we don't have the urge to argue them, because we have to put into our mind that there is a generation gap, there is a culture gap. We have to put into our mind that it is us, the present generation, who brought the changes. William is insistent that we distinguish between the commodities made available by the culture industry and what people make of these commodities. He said that because he identifies that he caused an extreme damaging and untrue identification of a popular culture, namely as commercial, newspaper, magazines, entertainment within the working class culture. He also pointed out that popular culture lies outside the working class culture, for it is operated and thus manipulated by a commercial bourgeoisie as a capitalist method. And that ends my report about the two experts. Another expert will be discussed with my group mates. This has been Daniella Correos, ABS Ed 2A.
Good day everyone, my name is April May Azarconbu and I will be continuing our presentation. Today, my topic will be Raymond Williams, the analysis of culture, and E.P. Thompson, the making of the English working class. But let me first tackle Raymond Williams. Who is Raymond Williams? Raymond Williams was an author, academic, cultural theorist, literary critic, public intellectual, socialist, and a leading figure of the New Left. His analysis of culture focuses on the understanding of cultural theory, cultural history, TV, press, radio, and advertising. Now, for Raymond Williams, what is culture? Williams called this a social definition of culture, in which culture is a description of a particular way of life, which expresses certain meanings and values not only in art and learnings, but also in institutions and ordinary behavior. There are three general categories of definition of culture. The first one is culture ideal, the second one is documentary, and the third one is social. Now, what is cultural ideal? This is a state or process of human perfection in terms of certain absolute or universal values. By universal values, I mean people having the same value or worth. Spheres of human value encompass morality, aesthetic preference, human traits, human endeavor, and social order. Now, how about documentary? It is the second category in which, in a detailed way, it is a collection of human thoughts and experiences that are variously recorded. The significance of documentary culture is that it expresses what life is to us in direct terms when the living witnesses are silent. Lastly, social. It is the clarification of meanings and values implicit or explicit in a particular way of life or a particular culture. Implicit meaning something that is within a person, while explicit is something that can be seen and is already revealed to the people. This definition of culture is very crucial to the founding of culturalism. Both documentary and social categories ranges from an ideal emphasis, the discovery of certain absolute or universal meanings and values in which clarification of the particular way of life is the main end in view. As they say, change is the only constant thing in life. This thought is also the same with the different generations. Each generation, according to William, adapts to the society differently, therefore creating another value and another culture for themselves. There are three ways of thinking about culture. The first one is culture is a particular way of life. Second one is culture as an expression of a particular way of life. The third one, the last one, is cultural analysis as a method of reconstituting a particular way of life. Now, with all of that said, what is the analysis of culture? What is its purpose? The analysis of culture is the attempt to discover the nature of the organization, which is the complex of these relationships. The relationship between the things that I have already told you about. Culture exists on three levels. Level 1, lived culture, which means experienced by people in their day-to-day life in a specific place and at a particular time. The second one is period culture. It is the recorded culture which includes products and daily facts from a culture. The third one is culture of the selective tradition. It is the one that connects the previous types of culture. Many factors, such as interests and values of the dominant class, influence the selection of the text chosen for understanding the lived culture. Since we have finished our first discussion, let us now move on to our next topic, which is E.P. Thompson, the making of the English working class. Now, who is E.P. Thompson? Edward Palmer Thompson was a British historian, writer, socialist, and peace campaigner. He is probably best known today for his historical work on the British radical movements in the late 18th and early 19th century, in particular, the making of the English working class. In the preface to the making of the English working class, E.P. Thompson states, "This book has a clumsy title, but it is one which meets its purpose. Making, because it is a study in an active process which owes as much to agency as conditioning. The working class did not rise like the sun at an appointed time, but rather it was present at its own making." The English working class, like any class, is for Thompson a historical phenomenon. It is not a structure or a category, but the coming together of a number of disparate and seemingly unconnected events, both in the raw material of experience and in consciousness. It is something which in fact happens in human relationships. Moreover, class is not a thing. It is always a historical relationship of unity and difference, uniting one class as against another class or classes. As he explains, class happens when some men, as a result of common experiences, feel and articulate the identity of their interest as between themselves and as against other men whose interests are different from theirs. The making of the English working class details the political and cultural formation of the English working class by approaching its subject from three different but related perspectives. The first one, it reconstructs the political and cultural traditions of English radicalism in the late 18th century, religious dissent, popular discontent, and the influence of the French Revolution. The second, it focuses on the social-cultural experiences of the Industrial Revolution as it was lived by different working groups. These different working groups include weavers, field laborers, cotton spinners, artisans, etc. Finally, it analyzes the growth of working class consciousness, evidenced in the corresponding growth in a range of political, social-cultural, and strongly based and self-conscious working class institutions. The making of the English working class is the classical example of history from below. Thompson's aim is to place the experience of the English working class as central to any understanding of the formation of an industrial capitalist society in the decades leading up to 1830s. The making of the English working class is in so many ways monumental contribution to a social history. What makes it significant for the student of popular culture is the nature of its historical account. Thompson's history is not one of the abstract economic and political processes, nor is it an account of the doings of the great and the worthy. The book is about ordinary men and women, their experiences, their values, their ideas, their actions, their desires, in short, popular culture as a site of resistance to those in whose interests the Industrial Revolution was made. Before concluding this brief account of Thompson's contribution to the study of popular culture, it should be noted that he himself does not accept the term culturalism as a description of his work. This, and other related points, was the subject of a heated history workshop debate between Richard Johnson, Stuart Hall, and Thompson himself. One of the difficulties when reading the contributions to the debate is the way that culturalism is made to carry two quite different meanings. This is a complex issue, but as a coda to the discussion of Hogarth, Williams, and Thompson, here is a very simplified clarification. First is, positively, culturalism is a methodology which stresses culture as being of crucial importance for a full sociological and historical understanding of a given social formation. Second is negatively, culturalism is used to suggest the employment of such assumptions without full recognition and acknowledgement that culture is the effect of structures beyond itself and that these have the effect of ultimately determining, constraining, and producing culture. Thompson disagrees strongly with the second proposition and refutes totally and in Thompson Thompson disagrees strongly with the second proposition and refutes totally any suggestion that culturalism, regardless of the definition, can be applied to his own work. That ends my part of the presentation. Please stay attentive because there is still one presentation that we have left for you guys. Mr. Jovanne Clapano. Again, my name is April May Azarconbu. Thank you for watching my presentation.
Hello everyone, I am Jovanne F. Clapano and I will be discussing Stuart Hall and Buddy Wannell, The Popular Arts, a review by Ludovic Hunter Telny. But before anything else, let me first introduce to you who is Stuart Hall and Buddy Wannell. Stuart Hall was one of the most prominent and influential scholars and public intellectuals of his generation. He appeared widely on British media and taught at the University of Birmingham and Open University. Paddy Wannell, on the other hand, was a film scholar, educator at the British Film Institute and associate professor of film at Northwestern University. Their study, Popular Arts, was published in 1964. It opened up an almost unprecedented field of analysis and inquiry into contemporary popular culture. Counter to the prevailing views of the time, Hall and Wannell recognized popular culture's social importance and considered it worthy of serious study. After the year of publication, they hired the jazz musician George Melly as its pop critic. According to him, pop music is both pervasive and disturbing. Pervasive means spreading widely throughout an area or a group of people. Pop music was made by young people and for the most part emotionally immature. Maybe for other people it's boring, but for them it's an important part of their lives. The only art form they feel the need for a projection of their dreams and feelings. Pop music was often caricatured as the acoustic expression of depravity, loud, crude, and abomination. But it could also be seen to have an integrating effect on the national character, whether it is pop, jazz, folk, or other genres of music. We could not deny the fact that these songs are powerful things that soothe, inspire, educate us, and change our society like no other art form. Hall and Wannell struggled to imagine a future in which the idea of art pop might exist. The main emphasis in this book is on the content and forms of mass communication and the popular arts rather than the sociology itself. Mass communication refers to a message transmitted to a large audience. The means of transmission is known as mass media. Many different kinds of mass media exist and have existed for centuries. Both the messages and the media affect culture. Culture and media exert influence on each other in subtle, complex ways. The distinction between media and audience is hard to maintain because of this complex interaction between the attitudes of the young and what is provided for their consumption by the world commercial entertainment. The central purpose of the popular arts was to argue for a better understanding and appreciation of popular culture at a formal artistic level by drawing quite sharp distinctions between it and high art. Popular and high culture have different aims comprehensible only on their own terms. Hall and Whannell wrote that popular art has developed a history and a topography of its own, separate from high and experimental art. Nevertheless, the connection between the two cannot be denied. Popular art. This has always been the art which operates within the confines of the popular, a popular art for the people. Good popular culture is able to re-establish the relationship between performer and audience. It restates values and attitudes that are already known. And that will be all. This is Jovanne F. Clapano. Thank you, and once again, good morning.
I got these fresh eyes, never seen you before like this. My God, you're beautiful. It's like the first time